Are UFOs extraterrestrial intelligence or ordinary terrestrial phenomenon? The very first book that I read as a child, probably about 10, maybe 12 years old, that was an adult book, was Chariots of the Gods by Eric von Däniken. Now, this book served as my introduction to reading books that urged me to think about our place in the universe, to imagine other worlds, and it sparked an interest in everything from archaeology to science fiction to fantasy. The wonderful thing about books like this is that they serve as our entry point into reading, into imagining, into being curious. Now, I would go on to devour other books on UFOs and aliens. And I remember watching TV shows like the original Project Blue Book and In Search of. And of course, going to see movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Star Wars and Planet of the Apes. Then I grew up and I pretty much decided that UFOs or UAPs or whatever they're calling them nowadays, well, they just could not be real, right? I became a skeptic. I joined the Skeptic Society. I looked at the world logically and with reason, and I believed in logical fallacies, and that's what I read about, books that were about philosophy and how to think. Well, now these worlds are colliding, not only for me, but for you as BookFesters here at the BookFest Spring 2022. We are presenting the great UFO debate. Are they extraterrestrial intelligence or ordinary terrestrial phenomenon? Please welcome to the stage the founder of the Skeptic Society, Dr. Michael Shermer. Now, he is the author of Giving the Devil His Due, Reflections of a Scientific Humanist, plus many, many other books. He is the publisher of Skeptic Magazine, the host of the podcast, The Michael Shermer Show, and President Fellow at Chapman University, among other things. Now, we also have Paul Hynek, whose father was one of the real Project Blue Book investigators. His friends call him a mystical alien wizard man. He's a futurist, a professor, and an entrepreneur at the convergence of technology and entertainment. They are here as part of the first BookFest debate. Now, I'm going to set the ground rules here really quick. Each will have 5 minutes to present their position with their opening remarks before we move into a discussion guided by questions. And we do have some questions that were submitted to us from folks on social media. And then at the very end, each of our gentlemen will be given 3 minutes to make their closing remarks. And for everybody who's watching and listening, we do have a poll for BookFesters. We will put the link in the chat so you can decide who is the winner of the debate. And the results will be revealed in the virtual gift bag, which is sent to everyone at the end of the BookFest tomorrow. So without further ado, I would like to invite Paul, who is the affirmation, to take it away.
Thank you, Desireé. And hello, Michael. Pleasure to meet you. Belief is a funny thing. I think a lot of us think that a change in our core beliefs will come in a dramatic road to Damascus type of revelation. But I think more often the road to truth is a dark, windy path in the forest at night that makes us challenge our assumptions and our beliefs and weigh new evidence. And I hope that's what we may do today. There's an old saying that there are two kinds of people in the world: those who are okay with questions they can't answer, and those who are not okay having their answers questioned. I think most of us are that first camp where we're okay that we can't answer every question. It's a more scientific outlook for life. And I'd like to invite us to keep that in mind as we examine the topic for tonight. Is there some kind of alien presence or intelligence on Earth? That's the only question we really need to address. The secondary and tertiary questions about how could they get here, why do they look like us, what do they eat, are all very interesting. But if we see evidence for their presence, those are questions we don't have to answer right away. I think there are three types of people regarding UFOs. There are diehard skeptics who wouldn't even believe in UFOs if one landed on their front lawn. Then there are the true believers. Try to convince them that UFOs aren't real. Then there are people in the middle who look at the evidence and try to figure out what's going on. I think Michael and I are in the same camp there. Michael doesn't see enough extraordinary evidence for the claim, so he leans towards maybe no. Fair enough. I lean towards maybe yes, in part based on evidence that I'll share with you today. Now, my goal in this debate is not to get a debunker to become a believer. That's not reasonable. But perhaps somebody who doesn't believe in UFOs might at the end think, well, maybe. Or for people in the middle, including perhaps you, Michael, I might nudge you just a little bit more over towards maybe yes. Now, I have no, teeny bit. I have no personal experience. I've never seen a UFO. I've never been abducted. I don't have any message to impart upon the human race from the star people. I have no horse in the race. I like the universe as it is, and I have no need to concoct some kind of sky god. I don't have a book. I have no social media footprint. I'm just a guy interested in the topic. For evidence, I'll cite three things. As you mentioned, my father was for 20 years the scientific consultant for the Air Force's Project Blue Book. However, Blue Book may have started off, it rapidly became less of a serious scientific endeavor, much to the chagrin of my astrophysicist father, and more of a PR exercise to tamp down hysteria about flying saucers, to the extent that the top brass issued orders saying, explain every case, rubber stamp them as solved, so that some people called it the Society for the Explanation of the Uninvestigated. Even though they investigated about 12,000 cases, they still couldn't explain over 700 of them. That's a 5% failure rate. And Michael may see that as residue or anomalies, and sure, that is. But in the years since Project Blue Book, we've had tens of thousands more cases, and we have a fairly consistent 5% failure rate to explain them, which means that we've amassed thousands and thousands of cases that have been investigated, but that we can't explain. I find that interesting. Now, many of us are aware of the Navy's videos and their public disclosures recently. Personally, I don't place a lot of stock in these videos. They're kind of recycled from years ago. They're grainy, and I've seen some pretty good conventional explanations for some of them. But what I like is what the Navy has said publicly. Now, they use different terms, like you mentioned, Desireé, but they've essentially said, we see lots of UFOs. We see them in the air. We see them in the water. There have been almost daily reports sometimes that people have caught them on radar, seen them through high-powered binoculars, and on camera. The Navy has said, we're concerned about the security for our aviators. Now, in the Pentagon report last June, the Pentagon, in the space of 9 pages, said twice, and the second time in all caps and bold letters, there's a potential risk to national security. Now, when a branch of the US military says, we see UFOs and we're concerned, and the Pentagon says, us too, I find that compelling. And finally, I've met a lot of people who've had intriguing tales that they've related of experiences, some with other witnesses, radar corroboration, etc. I know that individual eyewitness accounts don't move the needle much for science, but when I combine those with the thousands of unexplained cases and this open stance from the military saying we see them, we don't know what to do with them, and these individual cases which provide kind of a narrative thread, altogether, those convince me not to be a true believer, but to lean towards maybe yes.
Very well. Michael.
Okay, that was very interesting and very thoughtful, Paul. Yeah, I guess, Desireé, we're probably not going to be like Jerry Springer here throwing chairs at each other. So, well, first, I guess I would make a distinction between two different questions. Are they out there and have they come here, they being aliens? I think most scientists would be leaning toward they're probably out there somewhere just by the law of large numbers. You know, almost 1 trillion galaxies, 100 billion stars per galaxy. Pretty much every star has planets around it. Just by the odds, no matter how low the probabilities that you get from bacterial grade life to big brains and technology and communications and space travel, they're going to be out there somewhere. Okay, but that's a separate question from, have they come here? Most scientists who think they may be out there are pretty skeptical that they've come here. You know, it's a big empty cosmos. The chances of them finding Earth is pretty rare. if you just think of the fastest spacecraft we have, Voyager, traveling at something like 40,000 miles an hour, is going to take 70,000 years to get to the closest star to us. And it's not even going there. So, there's a lot of empty space. So I think I'm not surprised that we haven't been contacted. But have we in fact been contacted? That's, I think, what's on the table here. So let me switch to my just a handful of slides here to kind of walk through this argument of what I think is going on here. I am part of this Galileo project that Avi Loeb sponsors at Harvard University, in which he's the discoverer of this object here, Oumuamua, which is the first extraterrestrial object to enter our solar system. That is to say, it came from another solar system. What is it? The artist rendition here paints it as a rock. Avi thinks it's possibly a artifact from an extraterrestrial civilization. This is just an artist rendition, so we don't know what it is. All we have is light signals, and I'm picturing here some of the various Navy UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon. We have covered this a lot in Skeptic. This is one of our perennial topics. This was 2 issues ago about the UAPs from the government. So I think there's 3 hypotheses on the table for unidentified aerial phenomena. One, they represent ordinary terrestrial phenomenon, camera and lens effects, visual illusions, balloons, etc. The second is extraordinary terrestrial, that is Russian or Chinese spy planes or drones capable of feats of physics and aerodynamics unheard of in the United States. This has elevated to a higher status these days because of what's going on with Russia. And then 3, extraordinary extraterrestrial, that is aliens. So I'm going to argue here that the likeliest hypothesis is number 1, that these are probably all examples of ordinary terrestrial phenomena. And the reason has to do with signal detection theory, Bayesian reasoning, and the base rate effect. I'm going to argue that there's a 95% probability that these objects represent ordinary terrestrial phenomena. How do I get there? Well, let's first back up. Everyone talks about the New York Times covered this and said they are real. Okay, the main author on this a New York Times article is Leslie Kean, who is a pro-ufologist. She wrote a book about this subject called UFOs and how all these people speak out on this. It was a New York Times bestseller. And she asked her readers to consider with an open and truly skeptical mind that such sightings represent a solid physical phenomenon that appears to be under intelligent control and is capable of speeds, maneuverability, and luminosity beyond current known technology, that the U.S. government routinely ignores UFOs and, when pressed, issues false explanations, and that the hypothesis that UFOs are of extraterrestrial or interdimensional origin is a rational one and must be taken into account given the data we have. Okay, here's where I get my 95% figure. According to Kean, roughly 90 to 95% of all UFO sightings can be explained as, quote, weather balloons, flares, sky lanterns, planes flying in formation, secret military aircraft, birds reflecting the sun, planes reflecting the sun, blimps, helicopters, the planets Venus or Mars, meteors or meteorites, space junk, satellites, swamp gas, swimming eddies, sundogs, ball lightning, ice crystals, reflected light off clouds, lights on the ground or lights reflected in the cockpit window, and more. What's left after this? A small residue. That is to say, in all fields of science, there's a residue of anomalies unexplained by the dominant theory. That doesn't mean the prevailing theory is wrong or that alternative theories are right. It just means that more work needs to be done to bring these anomalies into the accepted paradigm. And as Paul said, it's always okay to say, I don't know. Most of us have a hard time saying that. So the entire extraterrestrial hypothesis is based on the residue of data left over after the above list has been exhausted. And what's left? Not much. Okay, so the base rate effect goes like this. Okay, if 95% of all of X can be explained by Y, that is my first hypothesis. X appears again. Here's another anomaly. What is it? Another video, another photograph. What is it? Well, what's more likely? That it's Y, that is at 95%, is the explanation of ordinary terrestrial phenomena, or is it something else that is in that 5%? So you have 2 bins, the 95% bin and the little 5% bin. Okay, so a new sighting appears. What's it most likely to be? In the 95% bin. As medical students are told, if you hear hoof prints outside the door, think horse, not zebra. right? There aren't many zebras around here, and there's lots of horses. Okay, so what's more likely? And that's pretty much what the the whole UAP thing is based on, covered by no less than 60 minutes. So let me just kind of wrap it up there, and then we can get into our discussion. Um, I'm not saying that it's not possible to be extraterrestrials. It could be. I'd say it's probably more likely to be, if it's not in the first bin of the 95%, and it's in the second bin of terrestrial, Chinese or Russian assets, drones or spy planes or experimental aircraft. I'm still skeptical of that because of the way technology works. Innovation. There's no innovation in the history of the world that doesn't have predecessors to it that everybody knows about. And all nations are just one step ahead or behind another nation. And the chance that the Russians or the Chinese have come up with some, like almost faster than light travel, and that the astronauts don't die when they turn sharp left and go 10 times the speed of sound in an instant that we're told about these UAPs. I just don't see how that's possible. It'd be like we're still on the Wright brothers biplanes, and they have stealth bombers. It's just everybody steals each other ideas. They back engineer the technologies and so on. If other nations had these UAP type objects that can do incredible aerodynamic feats, we would know about it. We would steal it. We'd spy on them. They would, if it was us, they'd spy on us, and they'd know about it and so on. Therefore, I think it's probably most likely going to be ordinary terrestrial. And but the fact that I'm even part of the Galileo project means I'm open to it. I mean, let's take photographs. On that 60-minute show, the Navy pilot, the one Navy pilot, Fravor, he said he sees these things almost daily. Well, if that's true, and everyone, the coast, California and the East Coast, has cell phone cameras, these kind of high resolution cameras, everybody has them. And if they're out there daily, we should have thousands of high resolution videos and photographs. There are none. There's just the ones we've seen, those grainy videos and those blurry photographs. So I'm very doubtful the things we're going to photograph with the Galileo project, I'm pretty sure are going to be ordinary terrestrial phenomena.
Fair enough. And yeah, you bring up a really good question about the cameras and the cell phones, and why are we always looking at grainy things or just lights in the sky? Paul, I want to circle back to you though, because I was there. You invited me very graciously to the premiere when the more current version of Project Blue Book, the TV show, came on. And I remember asking you, I think we were around several people, and chit-chatting, well, what is it? What were the things that your dad really experienced? What is at the core? And you said something to the effect, it was very cryptic, and maybe you were just having fun, but yeah, I can't tell you because you wouldn't believe it. It was something to that effect. So what is the thing then? What is the experience that your dad had, or the premise of everything that gets you sitting in that seat right now?
I think I was probably engaging in some entertainment industry party hyperbole. My father, he's known for UFOs in some circles, but he was not a UFO guy. He was an astrophysicist who wound up having a later life side hustle of UFOs. I'm quite sure when the Air Force asked him to investigate UFOs, he thought it would be a couple weekends worth of work. He thought there was nothing to flying saucers and ray guns. He thought it was an annoyance. But over time, he didn't believe in UFOs. I don't think scientists traffic in the word belief. He came to accept the weight of the accumulated data as meriting further discussion. As Michael said, he never said that there are extraterrestrials. Both my father and I find the extraterrestrial hypothesis rather implausible for a variety of reasons. That doesn't negate the evidence of the phenomena, but it's just a very difficult question to answer. So my father had some sightings, but according to his rather stringent level of what constitutes a UFO, he didn't have any sightings. And I think it's important because if you have like a personal feeling that you've had this contact, or you're drawn to the phenomena, you may have a different relationship to the phenomena than someone that's a bit more objective and just wants the cards to fall where they may.
Michael, okay, let me ask you this. Neil deGrasse Tyson once told Larry King a few years back, it would be inexclusively egocentric to suggest that we are alone in the universe. So it sounds like from what you were saying in the beginning that you don't think that we were alone. You're just saying that you don't think that there's any proof that something has visited this planet.
Right. That gets to back to my first question. Are they out there? Have they come here? These are two different questions. First of all, I don't want to believe in something that you have to believe in for it to be real. I mean, it's either real or it isn't. And I do think, Paul, that on the road to Damascus, where Saul becomes Paul, would happen if there was really unmistakable evidence. I think the vast majority of scientists would go, "Oh yeah, okay, they're real. They're here. There it is. You know, the spaceship. It's at the White House, or whatever it would be. You know, it's just that they remain unconvinced by these blurry photographs and grainy videos and anecdotes about things that go bump in the night and so on. And I agree with Neil, and he and I are on the same page on this. He's also skeptical of UFOs as extraterrestrials for all the reasons I said. And so it's just a matter of back to the signal detection. What is your response criteria to get to a hit where you go, yes, that's a hit, that's real? And scientists have a pretty high standard. You got to really pile on the evidence. You can't just have one experiment, one sighting. I mean, we talk about anecdotes and sightings, and Paul mentioned the thousands, and his father was surprised about how many. Yes, but 10 anecdotes, 100, 1,000, 10,000. At some point, that's not enough. You still need one more thing, one more step, kind of an iron rule of science, that you have to have something empirical that's unmistakable. It doesn't depend on people believing it or anything like that. And that would be something like an actual physical object. The spacecraft, there it is, Area 51, and Desireé somehow manages to get us passes to go there next weekend, and we go in there, and there it is. Oh my God! Okay, I would be Saul. I would become Paul. Okay, I would believe. Yeah, okay, assuming it wasn't just something that's like 10 years ahead of what we already know we have. Something like the B-2 bomber from. Let's say if it was in the 1970s and I saw it and went, wow, okay, what's that? But it's not that different from what we already had. Something like that. It'd have to be unmistakably extraterrestrial. And then I would believe.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about Area 51. I don't believe that necessarily the government has captured saucers and alien beings. To Michael's point about technology, if we had reverse engineered the propulsion system of a flying saucer, let's say from Roswell, they'd be speaking English in Beijing right now. The military is not going to sit on that type of technology. And secrets are very hard to keep. And we've had guys like Bob Lazar, who I don't place any credence in, and others with these sort of deathbed confessions. But to me, they're not convincing that we've had this momentous secret low these many years.
Yeah, just think about like the most top secret scientific project, technological project ever, the Manhattan Project. We detonated an atomic bomb in 1945. 1949, the Russians detonated theirs. They stole our stuff. They had a spy there at Los Alamos. This happens all the time. No one gets very far ahead of anybody. And the Chinese know everything, not just the government is doing, but Google, Apple, all these companies that spend enormous resources to protect their intellectual property. And still, all cell phones, all laptops, they're all pretty much the same. Everyone's at pretty much the same level.
Paul, I'm just going to dig in at you a little bit further. We did a clubhouse. We did a clubhouse 6 months ago, 5 months ago. And you were talking about experiencing the alien presences. You were talking about taking hallucinogenic drugs to have these experiences. Can you tell me what you do believe in? What is the thing that you believe is out there? Because it's got to be something, right?
Here we go. Okay, so I want to give a little bit of preface to this. I was having lunch with a friend who asked me where my dad thought UFOs came from. And I said, look, as a scientist, he was comfortable saying there's a phenomena to investigate, but where they come from, that's a whole extra level of discomfort for a scientist to talk about, especially an astrophysicist and, talking about the vast distances of space. And also, even if there are nuts and bolts crafts coming from other planets, based on some of the aspects of reports, that doesn't seem to encompass the totality of what people report. So my father thought, well, look, maybe there are other explanations, perhaps interdimensional. Okay. So my friend suggested a book to me called Alien Information Theory. Alien Information Theory. I said, that's the sexiest book title ever. And it's about a growing number of user reports of people who take DMT, which is the most powerful psychedelic known to man. And I read that and another book called Spirit Molecule by Rick Strassman. And the sort of early reports he had kind of echoed to me some of the early days of reports of UFOs. I thought, that's interesting. And the people that take DMT subjectively come across with this feeling of hyper reality, that this is a real experience they had. Actually, perhaps, Michael, later we can talk about an idea I have to test that. Now, of course, you have to discount this very heavily because you're under the influence of a psychedelic drug. But I thought, purely in the interest of science, mind you, I would take one for the team and try this. And I did. And I felt I was transported to this other realm. And I asked the intelligence I met there, because this is an important question for mankind and very resonant for my family. Are you the intelligence that we perceive behind UFOs and aliens? And I felt millions of miles of synapses rumbling and neurons firing. And the answer came down, we can't explain in a way that you would understand. Okay. The typical kind of mystical, just around the corner stuff that you get in this murky field. And I thought, well, I understand no. So I thought, that's interesting. Now, I don't position that as anything more than an interesting anecdote. But what I'm interested in is there, a lot of people report things with aliens and ghosts and things like that. There's not a lot of concrete evidence for a lot of these things. But I'm interested in people who report ongoing encounters with what they feel to be superior beings. Is there a way to bring back information from them, sort of bespoke, curated questions and answers that scientists like Michael, who are open-minded but healthily skeptical, might say, okay, that's interesting, because right now people come back and say, oh, the aliens say you guys need to get together and kumbaya and love each other, or Aunt Ginny has the gout. Okay, that's great, that's random, but perhaps there's some more standardized control information that we could try to inculcate in these experiences that might actually pique the interest of science. It's a Hail Mary, I grant you.
All right.
No,
Michael?
it's an Aunt Ginny. Yeah. Okay, so I've thought a lot about this. I'm a little bit of a square on drugs. I just I'm a gin and tonic kind of guy, not a ayahuasca, LSD kind of guy. I have not tried that. I know people that have. I read that book, The Spirit Molecule. Actually, there's a really good Netflix documentary based on that book called The Spirit Molecule, and it's hosted by none other than Joe Rogan. And he's done this. Graham Hancock, who we were talking about earlier, and I were on that, and Graham's into this sort of thing. Most people do swear that feels like they've gone to another place that's real. They don't experience it as in their head, like, well, I'm just having a crazy trip. They feel like I've gone somewhere. Much like people that have out-of-body and near-death experiences, most of them report, not that I had this weird hallucination or psychological thing in my head, but that I actually went to this other place. That's how most people interpret that. Part of the problem is we don't experience our own brain operating. There's no sense of my neurons firing. The brain senses no pain. So neurosurgeons can wake patients up during brain surgery. It's usually done for epileptic seizures. And they get their permission to wake them up, and then they tap around the brain with electrodes, and that person just reports what they're experiencing. And you can get to certain areas of the temporal lobe here above the ears where people will feel like I'm up on the ceiling now, I'm looking down. Well, my right arm is up, my left arm, my right leg, my right leg is floating. They have all and they're just lying there flat on the operating table. So, certainly the experiences are powerful. They don't sense it at all that it's neural tissue, but we know that's what it is. So the problem, Paul, is that how do we get to from a subjective internal truth, personal truth,
Right.
I had this mystical experience, to it's an objective empirical truth where it's not just
Mhm.
what I believe, but you can believe it too. And if your answer is, well, if you take the ayahuasca, you can go there, and so I do, and I report back, oh my God, I went there, and then and
That's not
Desireé
enough.
goes, hey. I'm still skeptical. It's like, Desireé, you take the ayahuasca, and then
Yeah.
Desireé takes it. He goes, "Oh my God, I went there too." Of course, her there is going to be different than yours and mine. So, and at some point, I don't know how we can solve that epistemological problem of making it just not just my personal inside trip, but all of
Yeah.
us experience that as a reality.
I have an idea, and it's like I said, it's a long shot, but I'd like to keep working on that to try to make something that would be of interest to science and get past that. No matter how real it feels to you, that doesn't do anything for anybody else.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm all ears. let's run that experiment and publish it in Skeptic. Unless I have to take the ayahuasca, and my wife's not too crazy about my going on acid trips or whatever. I have the standing invitation to go to Costa Rica and spend a week taking ayahuasca and doing yoga and I don't know what else. And I just haven't been able to do that yet.
All right, fair enough. Okay. I have some questions that we got from some people. So these might come from a little out of left field, but I think they might be enjoyable. So, Paul, going under the assumption that the military does have access and is exposing the aliens, do you feel that the governments of the world are preparing in some way for us to have this exposure to the aliens? Or are we already past that phase? Are the governments of the world deciding to keep it from us? Thoughts on that?
That's a good question. And again, I don't believe that the government has these smoking gun secrets that they've kept from us for a long time. And frankly, I'm past the point of caring really much about what they do or don't do. Um, there are a lot of people that I know, I think Michael knows as well, who think that this is part of an increasing editorial cadence to prime the pump for the capital D disclosure. I don't know. I have no inside knowledge of that. It sounds somewhat improbable to me. Um, so, one of the questions that I find interesting is that people say, I'm convinced the government has this technology and they have an obligation to release it. Well, I don't know that the military has any obligations to release any information. Michael mentioned the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers were convinced that aviation would end warfare as we know it because you could see the enemy. They didn't think about payloads. So any technology has the potential to be used for bad. So I think the Air Force should release information about UFOs or technology they have. And the other corollary to that is, okay, so you're saying that's information that benefits mankind. Well, it doesn't matter where it comes from. What if the Air Force organically in their own skunk tank develops information that could benefit humanity? Should they then be obligated to release that? So I just don't know about the government having information or actually being coordinated enough for an editorial schedule. It's tempting to think of the government acting as one monolithic block, as a rational, coherent actor. Nothing further could be from the truth. There are different fiefdoms fighting and jockeying for position, and I can't see them coordinating on such a grand tapestry as UFO disclosure.
Fair enough. Michael, any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. The government does keep secrets. The government does lie to its citizens. We know this from the Pentagon Papers, the Afghanistan Papers, the WikiLeaks. It's astonishing. Even President Transparency, Mr. Obama, said, I'm going to tell you everything when I get in there that we're doing. Well, he didn't. And he didn't close down Gitmo, where we have these prisoners offshore, so they're not protected by the U.S. Constitution, and so on. None of that ended. The surveillance state got bigger during Obama. Okay, so that tells us that there's something going on with bureaucracies. Unfortunately, it's probably not as cool and sexy as they're hiding the aliens. It's more like exactly what Paul said: fiefdom defense. Right? Each department has a budget, and they want to keep their budget, and they got to ramp up the security threats, or else, then their budgets may be cut if they do too good a job at preventing terrorism or whatever. And so they lie about mostly mundane things. And one of my favorite episodes of Rogan's podcast was with Edward Snowden, from an undisclosed location in Moscow. And Joe loves all the the conspiracy theories with the cigarette smoking man behind closed doors, pulling the strings to run governments and control revolutions and wars. And Snowden goes, let me tell you what's actually going on. It's mostly just bureaucrats trying to keep their jobs and get pay raises and hire their buddies and keep their little fiefdoms going. And so they lie about this or that little thing here and there just to, make sure their department is still needed. But they're not trying to control the world. They're not trying to start revolutions and wars. Maybe Putin does that, but the average bureaucrat is not doing that kind of thing.
Right. And I'm speaking to two atheists. And I think that's part of this idea that we kind of want there to be aliens. We kind of want the government to somehow be in control. We want there to be somebody behind the scenes that makes us feel safe, because if there's something there, it kind of gives us a bit of comfort, doesn't it? And it's kind of scary to think it's just chaos and people running around with their own agendas and that there's no plan. There's nobody in charge. There's nobody that could possibly come to save us, right?
I don't know if they're sky god. They're not doing a lot to make me feel comfortable, so I don't know. Right. I think I'm fine without them.
If they're running the world, they're doing a crappy job of it.
Yeah, I think we could upgrade.
Right. Okay,
no, but Desireé, you're touching an important point here. I think one of the appealing aspects of all conspiracy theories is it's kind of a simplification explanation for chaos and complexity that it's hard to wrap the mind around, which makes you feel insecure. The world is unpredictable. Price of gas has just now gone up to almost $8 a gallon here in LA. Who knows? And you see these news stories. We don't know why the price of gas is going up. It's like, okay, in other words, no one's in control, right? No one understands what the hell's going on. And, that's scarier than that there's 12 guys, called the Illuminati in London that are running the world. That actually feels better. Like, okay, now I understand why things are going on, as opposed to no one knows what's going on because no one's in control. It's like, that's actually scarier.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned right before we started, you mentioned being on Joe Rogan's podcast and something about, it's very popular nowadays because of the COVID stuff and because of everything. And, is that part of it? If you really want to have that popularity, you want to pull people towards you, if you want to grow a following, it's be the guy that talks about the conspiracy theories. Because you guys are both agreeing right now. And I don't know, this is maybe but when
I love conspiracy theories. No, I love conspiracy theories. My next big book is on conspiracy theories out this fall. Even though I'm skeptical of some of them, conspiracies really do happen. 2 or more people plotting in secret to gain an unfair, illegal, or immoral advantage over somebody else is a conspiracy. And that happens all the time. 9/11 was a conspiracy by 19 members of Al-Qaeda. Lincoln was assassinated by a conspiracy. Watergate was a conspiracy. Iran-Contra was a conspiracy. Much of Vietnam and Afghanistan was conducted in secret, without not only without the public knowing, without Congress knowing. How does this happen in a democracy? It happens because those are conspiracies. Volkswagen cheating the emission standards in Europe, that's a conspiracy. So my argument is that enough of conspiracy theories turn out to be true that it's not irrational to get a little paranoid because sometimes they really are out to get you. And sometimes they really do lie. Whoever, corporations, governments, anybody with big power. There's almost something in human nature that says, I have power. Okay, now I'm going to have a different moral standards. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think to your point, Desireé, we're pattern-seeking mammals. We want to find order in randomness. And it's just really tempting. And it's been evolutionary advantageous for us to find patterns. If there's danger and you see a pattern before that, you save your clan. If not, you die, perhaps. So the people that were skeptical, that didn't think anything was going on, got killed off. So it's the people that are more prone to say there's something behind there. And so we have this propensity to believe this. And now with social media, I think it's sort of turbocharged because you seem like an authority in your friends group, that you've scooped something and you see that this thing, and hey guys, did you know that Bill Gates will give you $1 for every email you forward? And it's kind of cool. So I think that's sort of added fuel to the fire that was already there in our primate substrate.
Right. So in other words, we're just apes that got too smart for our own good, and now we're suffering the consequences of our own
I don't know if
technology.
apes would look at us as having gotten a lot smarter.
I hear you. I hear you. Okay, here's a fun one. Somebody asks about fast radio bursts. Michael, fast radio bursts. Have you heard of those? The sounds that the universe is apparently making?
Oh, yeah, that'd probably be a better question for Neil, but he's not here. So no, unless you're talking about rotating neutron stars that have these rapid bursts of radio signals that radio telescopes can pick up. In the early days of SETI, they had the so-called WOW signals. Because somebody wrote "wow" with an exclamation point on the little printout of where the signal was. Turned out it was just a terrestrial signal anyway. So, but that's again a signal detection problem. Is it noise, or is it coming from out there and it's a non-natural phenomenon? So there you need some kind of criteria, which is why Sagan in Contact had the sequence of prime numbers, because no rotating neutron star is going to bleep out a series of prime numbers. That has to be in a form of intelligence. So something like that, that's a nice attempt to say what is going to be our standard, our criteria to decide hit or miss, noise or signal. And that, so the SETI, the whole SETI community, they have a set of algorithms and rules, like this is what we're going to do if we have a signal. We're not going to hold a press conference. We're going to call our friends at other observatories, have them check it out and see, because it's probably noise. So that they try to be skeptical, and they keep the bottle of champagne way in the back of the fridge because it's probably not going to be used. But if it is, it's there.
Yeah, it's probably too old. Champagne doesn't last that long.
It doesn't? Oh no.
No. Red wines will last longer. Your whites,
yeah,
your
that's
champagnes,
right.
they don't really last that long. Okay. Underwater craft. Paul, you brought that up briefly when you were doing your introduction. What about underwater aliens and UFOs, underwater craft? Here's a very specific question. Is there a secret underwater base off of Catalina Island? Thoughts on that?
Well, there's Atlantis, but that's more in the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, these are called USOs, unidentified submersible objects. And there are books written about them. I don't know diddly about them. I think it's interesting, and I'm not surprised if there is a craft that is more advanced than we know. I don't know why it couldn't go into water as well. I mean, we've made, submersible cars and things like that. I just don't know much about these reports. I find them pretty cool. That's about it.
Any thoughts on that, Michael?
Oh, well, any craft that goes through the water, I mean, we know what the density of water is, and it's going to have to be structured a certain way to push through the water, and it's going to have a propulsion system. That's why both mammals and fish have the same kind of body structure, a fusiform body that's kind of streamlined, and some kind of propeller system at the back to push it through the water. So any kind of submersible craft, like all submarines, have the same design because they have to be. So again, no nation or even alien is going to have some other kind of design. So these things are restricted by the laws of physics. Just the density of water, the gravity of the planet, or whatever. And if you think about what are the aliens going to be like on another planet if they exist, this is an interesting debate I've had with Richard Dawkins and Simon Conway Morris, who both believe in kind of convergent evolution, that there's only so many variations on a theme of living organisms, and that you're going to end up, if we're going to encounter aliens, they're going to have to be something like bipedal primates. They don't have to be primates. They could be reptiles or whatever. But the idea is that, they have to have the hands to make tools, or else you're not going to have communicating technologies and spacecraft and things like that. I tend to side more with Sagan and Stephen Jay Gould that it's more randomness and contingency in evolution. How many species have evolved on Earth? 10 billion to 100 billion, somewhere in there. And only a handful have ended up being bipedal, with big brains on one end and legs on the other end and hands. I mean, most species do just fine without those characteristics, and most species do fine without a big brain. This would actually be an argument that we're more likely to be alone or very rare, because you don't really need a big brain and hands and tools and technology to survive. Most millions of species do just fine with tiny little brains. And anyway, so I suspect that the alien abduction accounts we hear, where they're very human-like, are very human stories. Those are sleep paralysis, kind of lucid dreams, not actual aliens, because I just don't suspect they're going to be these bipedal-like primates. Not to mention doing weird sexual things in the middle of the night where you're asleep, which is another very human thing to experience. So most likely that's in people's heads.
Yeah, I mean, if something's intelligent too, we have intelligent beings in our oceans, but they can't do anything. Like you said, they don't have the
Right.
hands. The octopus,
Right.
they have 8 legs, but they can never build a spaceship and get out from
Right.
the ocean. So, think about
Right,
what's out there
so-
that we.
Yeah, that's why Sagan in Contact didn't depict the aliens. He didn't want to contaminate the idea, because who knows what they're going to be like. Most science fiction aliens are restricted by the Hollywood wardrobe budgets, and how many kind of costumes they have, and how much latex they can put on somebody's forehead to make them a Klingon. This is just not likely to be what alien life is going to be like.
Exactly. And Paul knows a thing or two about special effects and Hollywood makeup and all that kind of stuff too. Okay, gentlemen, I think we got about a few minutes left for each of you to have 3 minutes for your closing arguments. Paul, would you like to kick that off?
Okay, sure. So, to me, I don't say that UFOs or alien intelligence exists here on Earth. I don't know. I don't have enough evidence for me to conclude that. But for me, the weight of the evidence of thousands of unexplained reports and the interesting stance taken by the Navy. And you could say that the Navy is saying, hey, we're afraid of these because they want to keep their budget. That's a potential aspect too. But to me, I kind of get a case of Occam's razor burn if I think of other reasons for them to say that. I tend to think that they're saying that because they believe that they see a lot of objects and they don't know what to make of that. To me, that's enough for me to say, yeah, I lean towards, yes, there may be something going on. That's as far as I go. And I'm about to bring out the worst argumentum ad populum you ever heard, Michael. In a recent, admittedly cherry-picked poll by the Pew Research Center, an overwhelming majority of 51% of Americans believe that aliens have come here. So I'd like to invite you to leave your radical fringe minority position and come bask in the glow of mainstream thought.
That's too funny. Yes, I'm familiar with those Pew polls. The wording on those is always, I think it's a little confusing. One of my critics of this, because people think, are they asking me if aliens are out there somewhere versus have they come here? Because inevitably, when I say, I'm skeptical that UFOs represent aliens, I get the response, so you think we're alone in the universe? No, that's not what I think. They're conflating those two different questions. So to me, I think, Desireé, the interesting bigger question here is why people do want to believe it. I do think there's a kind of a religious impulse behind it. It's a kind of a sense that these are, what I call deities for atheists, gods for sky gods for skeptics, that the human impulse that we're not alone, that there's somebody out there more advanced than us that knows we're here. That's God. That's the belief in God. And for those that eschew traditional religion, maybe this is a kind of religion. And I've actually floated this idea by the SETI people, and they think I've lost my mind, and they don't like this at all because they're just pure science. We're just looking. But I think the search itself, why do you care? I think does have a kind of a deep spiritual, almost a religious impulse in a good way. I mean, it is a legitimate question, and I would be surprised if we're the only ones. It would be shocking, a total waste of space, as Sagan liked to say. So I think there's something deep in the human psyche about it.
Excellent. Gentlemen, Paul Hynek, Michael Shermer, thank you so much for joining us at the BookFest. I appreciate it, guys.
You're welcome,
All
Desireé.
right.
Thanks for having us.
You bet, you bet. And next we have the live author chats coming up. And actually, Paul is going to join us for those as well. Those are hosted by A.G. Billy and Scott Ryan. And you can join us and you can ask your questions not only of Paul, but there's going to be many other authors there. We have an array of dynamic speakers who will share their stories with you here at the BookFest Adventure Spring 2022 as it continues. Thank you.